Hi, I'm Sunny Dean,
And I'm Scott Drakeford.
and this is the Publishing Rodeo podcast. In 2022, we both launched debut novels in the same genre with the same publisher in the same year. But despite having very similar starts, our books and subsequently each of our careers went in very different directions.
That pattern repeats itself throughout the industry over and over. Why do some books succeed while others seem to be dead on arrival?
In this podcast, we aim to answer these questions and many more, along with how to build and maintain an author career.
Everyone signing a contract deserves to know what they're really signing up for. In an industry that loves its secrets, we'll be sharing real details from real people. We'll cover the gamut of life as a Big Five published author, from agents to publishing contracts, finances, and more. Welcome to the Publishing Rodeo podcast. We have with us Daphne of Illumicrate and Daphne Press fame. We feel extremely lucky to have her here because Sunyi and I and friends have been watching from afar all of the things that have been happening with Daphne Press, and we've been talking for even longer about, why is publishing so broken? What would it look like if publishing weren't broken? And then lo and behold, we see a publisher break onto the scenes that seems to have a lot of things figured out. So we're very excited to have you here, Daphne, and we've got a lot of questions lined up.
Thank you for having me and all the very kind words.
We were wondering if you could sort of tell us about the founding of Illumicrate, what sparked the idea and how you got started. Because the first time I ever heard of crates, I think, was when Harper was trying to woo me during the auction, and they sent a marketing deck that said, "We'll pitch you for crates." And I remember reading it, thinking, "What's a crate?" And then I learned how absolutely important they are, really, on the publishing scene, and was blown away. So, anyway, feel free to tell us about yourself.
By anyone who does it, I am Daphne. I am the founder of Illumicrate and Daphne Press. Illumicrate came first. I first got into sort of the book world through book blogging. So I was a book blogger 2011, so like a long time ago. And it was kind of at the height of, when blogs were a thing and book blogs were a thing. And I kind of found the book community through that. I made a lot of friends, got to know a lot of authors, got to know a lot of people that worked in publishing through the book blog. And in 2015, when crates were becoming a thing, not necessarily book crates, but just crates in general, there was a lot of things like loot crate and, like beauty crates and food crates and things like that. I thought, well, why don't I do a book one? And that was the extent of my thought process for a limit crate. Why don't I do one? It obviously took longer than that to get it set up and get started, but I felt that because I had connections in publishing, I could source the books, I could source some bonus material, and back then, we didn't have all the fancy all bells and whistles approach to the books. We were just getting trade copies with signed book plates or author letters or something along those lines. But I felt confident that I could source them, and I also felt confident in working with other small businesses to provide items for the crates as well. So I put my first box together in November of 2015. We had 150 boxes back then. That was the first box. We packed everything in my living room. I bribed friends with some pizza. And I said, why don't you guys spend your hard earned Saturday afternoon at my living room packing boxes? And they said, sure, we'd love to. Shout out to those friends who helped me from the very start. And yeah, it grew from there. And in 2018, I took the business full time. When I started the business, I had a separate job, a separate full time job in the finance sector. And in 2018, I kind of just made the leap and decided to try and make Illumicrate work full time, and thankfully it has.
So yet another overnight success story that actually has been 8 years in the making.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think people realize how old, like, how long it's been going on. It has been 8 years this year, and it was a very slow start. It was a pretty much a crawl, I think, for the first 5 years of the business. It was growing, but very steadily and very slowly. And it wasn't until the pandemic hit that the demand just kind of really shot up, and gratefully has kind of stayed relatively consistent since.
Yeah, and did that happen fairly organically when the pandemic hit, or was there some, outreach, something that you put together that made that happen?
I think we were fortunate in that, at least in the UK, and I'm pretty sure in other countries as well, obviously online businesses were still allowed to run during the pandemic. So fulfillment centers were allowed to run, the mail was allowed to run. And so we were, I guess, lucky enough to be in one of those industries that was completely online, and all of the parts of the business that affected, like the production of the books, like the shipping of the books, the packing of the books, those were all allowed to sort of run as quote unquote normal as possible. So when people were shopping online and people were reading more, it just kind of there was a lot of organic looking for things. It also did sort of coincide with the whole, when we were trying to make books prettier as well. I think back then we were starting to do a little bit. We were spraying a few edges here and there, and I think that with the whole, everyone just had a lot of time to order stuff online, just sort of worked its magic together. Yeah.
And just bookstores being shut. I mean, you can't go outside except for limited activities in the day. So it's like, where are you going to get your books from? Delivered to your house with toys.
Yep. Yeah, that's really interesting. I am curious how your user base grew between the UK and US, whether you have any other, footholds in other territories, that kind of thing. What does that look like, and how hard was that to build in both places at once?
I think the UK grew pretty steadily, but is obviously just a much smaller market than the US is. And the US will always be the largest kind of English speaking market because it is the largest English speaking country in terms of population. There's always a factor of cost, right? Because when we were shipping everything from the UK, the cost to ship our box to the US was nearly as much as the box itself. And that's just what international shipping is like. It is expensive. The boxes are relatively sizable, they're heavy because they've got books in them. And so there's only, you do just have to pay to get it, you know, on a plane across the ocean. Europe's always been a really big market for us, and we do have a lot of customers in Europe because we're lucky enough to use a really great sort of a shipper that kind of was able to navigate things in Europe, especially with Brexit and all of that stuff, and have kept our European shipping rates relatively low. And we do a lot of operational things right in Europe. I think, we take people's VAT front and pay it over to the authorities rather than people having to pay it when they receive their parcel. And it's just little things like that I think has really helped our European customers, like, be really satisfied with our offering, both from like a price and also from a like a admin perspective for them. In terms of growing, the market in the US is vast. It generally is vast. There's so many people, there's so many book lovers, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, I remember looking at the cost of Lumicrate when I first started, because when I first learned about crates, I thought I should learn about this because it's relevant to me, and being really surprised that actually, like, if you get like the basic ones that are just, I think, the book, it's not really that much more than going into a store and buying it, but it's prettier and it gets delivered. And I was like, okay, that was really impressive to me. And you mentioned how you started doing kind of the sprayed edges. I won't say my least favorite word. Scott looks confused. I'll say it once for you,
I
Scott.
don't.
Spreadges.
Got her.
Spreadges. The worst word.
Oh,
Oh
yeah.
no, it's nails on
I'm
chalk.
not. I'm not deep into that. Deep enough into that world to
Yeah, so
know that term or care really.
it's an
So.
amalgamation of sprayed edges. But yeah, I love how they look. I just the term. How much marketing knowledge did you have before you started? And what prompted you to move into like making kind of the books look special, and was that just something you were doing gradually and finding it was successful? And
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of everything. The edges, whether sprayed and obviously now, sort of digitally printed. We went through a phase of stenciling. We went through a phase of ombre. Like, there are many different processes for coloring edges of books, and I can spend the whole hour on, like, production. Book production, because I have become quite the expert on all the different ways you can make a book pretty. But I think that just kind of came from, honestly, what printers were able to do, and some genius at a printer was like, why don't we literally use a spray machine and spray some color onto the edges of books, and wouldn't that look nice? And I think we first started doing some sprayed edges in, like, maybe 2019-ish. I think there was, like, some books of ours started to have, just like a one colored sprayed edge, and that was like a big deal. I think as printer capacity became better, they've invested a lot into machines that can do amazing things to books. It just became, we always talk to the publisher in a lot of detail about how we want our books to look anyway. And we always know that people love fan art, for example, in books. People love, drawings of the characters. People love a fancy edge. People want their books to look unique and special. And, I think we, more than other places, have really pushed the boat on what's, like, feasible to do with a book. I think me and our team, we have real pie in the sky ideas of, like, how nice we can make books look. I'm a lover of the acetate dust jacket, which which is something I did for one of our books last year, and I absolutely love it. It's things like that. Like, I see things, or I think about things, and it's like, what if that would look nice? And actually, we are in a fortunate enough position now where if there's something that we want to see on a book, we can kind of get the publishers to ask the printers if it's possible. So it's a mix of what the printers are capable of doing, and now it is like, there's, like, imagination's your limit almost, and then we'll see what the printer can do, which is a really nice kind of shift. But our curation team have a great time with it.
I'm very tempted to ask about your full supply chain, but I think that's probably better held for offline. That wasn't in the approved list.
We can talk about that. Yeah,
No, no, no,
a
no, no.
separate conversation.
Yeah, those are industry secrets right there. I think we're going to ask some duplicate questions along the way as we move from Illumicrate into Daphne, and how those differ. But I am curious how you choose books for Illumicrate specifically, because I know you've got a lot of really big names, which is smart and probably doesn't need a lot of explanation. But I think you've got some pretty unique selections as well that might not have been just an obvious, well, this is going to sell a shit ton of books, right? So is there some unique insight that you have into your user base and how you select books based on that?
I would say that selecting books is an entire team's process. So I am not the only, like, it used to be just me. Now it is my entire team that get involved in selecting books, and that's one of the perks of working for Limicrate. You get access to all the cool manuscripts that we get. But our entire team are free to read any of the submissions that we have, and and people find things they're passionate about, and want to champion it. I do the same. I kind of follow the same process as the rest of my team. I'll read a blurb, or something will get pitched to me that I'm really into. I will read it, I will love it, and I'll be like, yes, I want to do that for Illumicrate. When I set up Illumicrate, or when Illumicrate was founded, we always did want to support debut authors. That was always a big priority of mine, because we are in, like, such a unique position to be able to share a debut author's book with a lot of people. And I was that way when I blogged as well. I always paid special attention to, and made an effort to read debut book and, shout about them if I love them. And, I've kind of carried that same thing on with Illumicrate. In terms of like how we determine the entire, so we think of Illumicrate almost in seasons. So when we plan it in seasons, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 kind of thing. And we think, what have we got on this season, and we try to pick titles that are not too similar to each other. So we really like a balanced list. We will include some big authors because, I think that's, to me, that's a kind of a nice thank you to our subscribers. It's like here's a book that we know you're gonna love because you love, this is a very popular author and it really resonates with our audience. And then we usually like to then have, some lesser known authors and new authors in the mix as well. And we really try our best to look at the year as a whole and make sure that we're balanced in every aspect of the types of books that we're promoting, the types of authors who are writing these books, the sort of stories they are. We really do try to balance like the entire schedule. And the team are great because I could not do the reading, all the reading required to run Illuminate, Daphne Press, and our other two boxes, Afterlight, which is our romance box, and Evernight, which is our horror box, myself. And so it's great to have the help of the team and their opinions. And we have to trust each other's tastes. We have to rely on each other to make good decisions about the books and know that the books that we pick our audiences will like. And our team are so involved with our audience. We have our own Discord, we're on all the social media. Obviously my team interacts with customers on email all the time as well, via customer service. We just get a really good vibe. They get a really good vibe of what works and what doesn't work.
So, I mean, in the on the author side, because crates really was massively taking off when I think around the time I'd sold my debut and just a bit before, and when kind of pubs were looking at pitching it and stuff. And there was talk between agents and editors about what books are crate books and whether a book might be a crate book. Do you feel like that is a thing? Do you feel like either Illumicrate specifically or crates in general have a kind of feel to them? I don't know if that's because I know you're looking for variety, but also, for example, like I was discussing this in Discord the other day, right? I was saying to Ryan, like, I love Annihilation, but you would never see that book in like a crate. Or like Game of Thrones, that doesn't feel like a crate book to me. And I was trying to pin down like what does. Like Gideon the Ninth feels like a crate book, but Annihilation doesn't. And I guess yeah, if you have a sense of like what that means, or
First of all, I was not aware for a time that publishers were specifically, saying that things were or were not crate books, or pitching it as such to authors and or agents. I was not aware that that was a thing, but I've heard it. I've heard it now a lot, so now I am aware. We have to look at the crate consumer, like the average crate consumer, who would be mainly female, mainly in their sort of 20s and 30s, I want to say, and probably lean more towards fantasy than any other genre. So taking all of those into consideration, I guess you kind of have to then pitch books that will appeal to a female 20 to 30 something fantasy loving audience. And that's not to say that's all our customers are. We obviously have a lot of customers that fall outside of those brackets. We're very grateful for our customers for sticking with us and for choosing Illumicrate because we do provide a wider range of different options than other retailers. I guess that's maybe what publishers mean when they say this is a crate book, right? It is a book that will appeal to that particular
I think
audience.
among ourselves we were also speculating that it can mean basically books that lend themselves well to creating like a fandom in a way. So again, to use like Gideon as an example, you go to a convention, there'll be loads of people dressed up as Gideon or Ninth House folks, or loads of fan art, loads of fan fiction, I suppose, things that inspire fan interaction. Whereas I love Annihilation, but nobody wants to be the biologist. So,
I completely agree with you. There's certain things that will make people want to. turn the story into a fandom,
Yeah.
you know. Hot character.
Yeah.
Cool world building, like having powers or feeling like you could see yourself in that world because you can be that, you can have that power, or you could be that type of person, or you could go to that school, or those sort of things. But to me, we did feature Gideon in one of our boxes, but to me, like, Gideon is it's not really a very obvious box book, I thought, because it's so strange, like it doesn't really follow the kind of linear storytelling. It's very, it's very irreverent, and that I actually don't think it is a box book, but I think, yeah, and not in the traditional sense. I think it's sci-fi. It's not really even really fantasy. It's like kind of so it's not really taking a lot of what I would consider what the majority of box buyers would think was a really great book. But I think that book was just obviously so good that it grabbed the the yeah, exactly. It just grabbed the audience and just like kept them enthralled.
You having your criteria, and you obviously understand your target audience, and that was, something I might actually touch on a little bit later. Um, but you having a pretty good idea of who you're targeting and how and what makes a crate book, or in your case, really just an Illumicrate book or your other variations, and then how other people try to interpret that based on what you release is extremely interesting. I love that, and I love how wrong we get it when we're like looking at things and trying to interpret based on that. Now, I do have just one question based on what you said about targeting your audience. Does that mean that you're primarily trying to like hit your major user base, that female 20s to 30s fantasy lover, with every book, and then trying to branch out here and there but not lose your main base? Or do you have specific books that you target toward, like, oh, we have a group of people that like uh, sci-fi or something, but it's not our main user base, but we'll throw them a bone every once in a while? How do you think about your market segmentation and how you target different groups?
No, that's a great question. Honestly, we very much, we target and we don't target. I know it's like a stupid answer, but we know who our core audience are, but we as a company love other types of books and want our audience to love those types of books. So we ask our audience to trust us when we pick something that is maybe different or irreverent or is out of their comfort zone of reading, and we ask them to trust that they know our taste, we know their taste, and this book will deliver something that they will enjoy, even though it's not something that they would normally pick up.
Have you had like a lot of backlash for anything you've released, and was it obvious?
Not really backlash so much. Sci-fi is always a harder sell for us. Every time we release like a theme and we mention that the book is a sci-fi book, you will naturally get people that just opt out. They'll be like, "Oh, we're skipping this month because it's a sci-fi book." And there's not really a lot we can do about that. But as a business, we love sci-fi and we want to support sci-fi authors and sci-fi stories. It's the same, unfortunately, sometimes with, queer books or diverse books, which hurts my heart more, I think, when people choose to opt out of those stories. It's not really backlash in that, oh, you've picked a really horrible book, um, like, no one likes it, is got 1 star rating on Goodreads. You know what I mean? No, like, and I feel like I trust my taste and my team's taste enough that that wouldn't happen. But there's certainly books with certain content that maybe other people don't resonate as well with, and you see it when you get the skips, essentially.
So it's mostly skips, and you probably see that in real time pretty quick,
Mhm.
rather than having to wait for people to read and get mad.
Yeah. I mean, they do that too.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure you get plenty of emails and chats and what have you.
I will admit I actually snuck onto the Illumicrate Discord early on. I left before my book came out, but I was just curious because when I'm in learning mode, I try and learn everything about a thing I don't know because I can't cope with not knowing information. But it blew me away that it was like this very interlocked, complicated, invested community, very active, very lively. All the stuff where it's like, oh, the reveals, the hints, the way everyone's reading it together at the same time, and it creates a live kind of FOMO. And I was like, this is really cool. I wonder why publishers don't do it because then you've got a whole community of people where even it's like they're not necessarily that excited about the book or they don't know it wouldn't be their thing. They might try it anyway to read it with their friends, and there's still that discussion, interaction. It becomes a community engagement activity instead of just this solitary thing that you do at home in your living room. Right. Anyway, sorry. I'll let Scott go to the next question now.
No, and I mean, I think that's a really interesting subject. How much of that was purposeful in terms of creating a community that does read-alongs and things like that? And did you notice a big uptick in, growth or maybe retention, et cetera, when you put that together?
I I'm not, I don't know. Like, I don't know if there is a specific correlation, but I do know that it fosters that community feel. And reading, as Denise said, is sometimes such a solitary thing, and it's not consumed in the same way that other forms of media are consumed, like TV shows or films. When they're out, everyone goes to watch them and see them kind of at the same time, and then the conversation is very now, it's very of the moment because everyone is fresh in everyone's head and everyone's watched it at the same time. Whereas books are different. So even when books come out, and people may even buy them all at the same time, but they don't necessarily read them at the same time, because it's a bigger time investment, than a lot of other forms of media. It is, you need to be in the mood, I think, to read a book and to spend, 4 to 8 hours, reading something. And, that's for me, like I'm a relatively quick reader. I'm sure it takes a lot people a lot longer to read books. I think that community feel really helps in terms of getting people excited about books, getting people wanting to continue reading the book because they know that they've got someone to talk to about it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think we all know that feeling as well growing up. Because I was one of the only people reading fantasy in Hong Kong in in the '90s in my Christian school, and I'd read this book and finish it and be amazing, and then it's like literally no one else I know is reading these. I've no one to talk to, but kind of now with the Illumicrate stuff, I was very aware that like, wow, people are going to read the book. They're going to get online. They're going to get a Discord to their community and say, hey, did you read chapter 20 yet? And everyone has, or a lot of people have.
And it's great. I'm the same as you. I grew up in the Philippines, and it was very hard to find fantasy books in the 90s. And I remember I was in, oh, what grade? I was in eighth, so I must have been about 12 or 13. And our local bookstore had just stocked like this fantasy series. And like seven of us classmates were like, look, we're all gonna buy it and read it, like, or we're gonna buy like 2 sets and we're all gonna share them and read them kind of at the same time so we can all talk about them. And that was kind of my introduction into fantasy. And so I now looking back feel like that was quite formative, to have that kind of community around me and we were all talking about the same book at the same time. That was so nice. Like, yeah.
So, how does that social media fit with your business? Because I think social media is a big part of building your community. And one of the things that we're always told in trad publishing is that social media doesn't really gain traction with readers. But that is exactly what Illumicrate has done. Like, you've got a massive social following and they're very, very engaged.
Kudos to my social media managers, honestly. So my first employee I ever hired is Caitlin. She's now our chief operations officer and does so much for the business, both for Illumicrate and Daphne Press. Shout out to Caitlin. But I initially hired her on to take over social media and customer service. That was her first job at Illumicrate, because I wanted to not do social media as soon as possible. She's done a terrific job with it, and then we then hired another social media manager. We're on our third social media manager now, and I think social media in itself has changed a lot since I first started using it, and I was running the Illumicrate account. But what I do have to say, I guess, is because we are selling a very visually appealing product, the visual social media works really well for us in terms of, obviously, the majority of our following is on Instagram, and that's how we grew our business. Now it's on I guess it's on TikTok, and obviously YouTube was a huge. We never ran our own YouTube channel, but we obviously collaborated with booktubers that did, and because our products are so visual, and the kind of the opening of the crate and the taking things out and taking photos of everything together was good content, not just for us but for everyone that you know produced it. I think naturally it just started to gain traction in that way.
But that's something I hadn't fully realized until literally today, right now, during this conversation, is that you're not just selling a gorgeous product and a fun personal experience, but you're selling a community experience, which is fantastic.
Just what Apple does.
Man,
When you
yeah.
Well, it used to
Oh, you
drive
go.
me nuts when I was a kid because I always felt like when I was a teenager, I used to refuse to use Apple products because people who buy Apple products used to say, "Oh, they're joining the Apple cult," right? It becomes like a lifestyle thing. It's like you've got your Apple phone and your Apple iPod, and it plugs into your Apple PC, and your mouse can that.
Yeah.
But it is smart. It's smart.
I have one brother in my whole family. I have one brother that doesn't have an iPhone, and our family texts are all fucked up because of that one brother. Stupid Hunter is a little hipster, and he won't get an iPhone. Anyway,
I,
um,
I did sorry, I did want to circle back on the point about publishers potentially, I mean, yes, a lot of them have social media presences and they can obviously do a social media push, but it's like all brands, and customers are really savvy now, and they know that when a brand is working with an influencer, they are paying the influencer to do it. And so their reviews and their unboxings and their photos are not 100% authentic. And I think the book community is probably one of the last this vestiges, or one of the last communities that is very much 100% powered by authenticity and what is authentic and what isn't, and I think if publishers and publishers do work with influencers, and it works great, but I think there's always a caveat from a customer's point of view. I think that this person has been paid to talk about this book rather than this person has bought this book out of their own money and are now talking about it. So I
Yeah.
feel like that is
And
a
like I
difference.
do think Harper are really savvy just from what I've seen of them in their marketing. And I do think there's a degree to which keeping some distance between themselves and readers is a choice that they make. You know that meme with the guys like, "Hello, fellow kids," with the right. No, but you know what I mean. You don't want to give that vibe. You're like, "Hey, we're pretending to be cool," and it's like, "You're a corporation."
yeah. I mean, but at the same time, like they're going through the same process. They find a book they like. They're championing it as people. They're a fairly small group of people. I'm thinking more of on the the side of putting together a Discord, that kind of thing. There's just not a lot of community, and I know some publishers have kind of tried to do a little bit of that over time, and it hasn't worked great for them for one reason or another.
I think targeting
But my point
booksellers.
is, it's very cool that
Yeah,
you are. Yeah,
I think targeting
yeah,
booksellers continues to work for them, and that's the readership that they target. Because
yeah,
if booksellers love your book, they'll sell dozens of copies. So
And it's great. And I
yeah.
think
It
I've
makes
seen so
sense.
many publishers that do target booksellers specifically. They have like bookseller only arcs, or, they invite booksellers to specific events to pitch their books to. And I always think that's a
Yeah.
great marketing strategy,
Yep.
for publishers.
Yeah, and I mean that community aspect does matter a lot, because I mean even today you two talked about growing up, how much that influenced you and what you read, and maybe how you enjoyed it. But I find myself even now reading. I have a huge stack up here is mostly my whole stack of books that I need to read still. Although I have read some of those. Um, but I find myself pushing my, literally hundreds of books that I want to read and own aside for whatever book my friends, Sunny, Richard, whoever, are saying, oh my God, this is so good. And I'm like, okay, fine, I'll read it.
Wait, I'm getting that even. I get that even just with my staff in our staff chats. Like if someone's reading something and they're very involved with it, obsessed with it, I want to say they make everyone want to read it, and then they do, and then we have a long conversation about the books, and it's really fun, because you want to read something that other people have read because people naturally, I think, want to share their opinions on books, and you want to know that someone's listening.
I think we need to have a psychologist on one of these days because not only does it influence what I read, it influences how I read. And I think not only am I giving books more time when somebody I know and trust says, hey, this is good, check it out, I'm really enjoying this, but I think my expectations going in, I'm looking for those to be met, and I'm looking for reasons for those to be met, and I might be putting aside some issues I might have with whatever I'm reading that I otherwise wouldn't because, there's that group aspect. So that's really fun and really awesome that you do that for debuts.
So I was just going to say, from the author side, it felt to me like Illumicrate was having a big impact on the book landscape, not just changing how publishers operate, because obviously before their crates were a thing, they didn't pay attention to it. Now that they are, they're very aware of it. But I think it has an impact on how we think about books and how we view them as more collectible, and that it's kind of like, especially with ebooks basically destroying mass market paperbacks, and
Mhm.
now it's more extreme, right? You get an ebook, you get an audiobook, you have like a collectible hardback. And I just wondered if you felt like Illumicrate was changing that book scene, or if you were kind of aware of that in a sense.
I don't know if it's just Illumicrate that's obviously driven the sort of the book collecting market. I'm sure it has had an impact on it for sure. I'm not going to say that we haven't. I am a collector, so as a person, I am a collector, and when I collect, I collect hard, so I go all in. Yeah, I don't have chill hobbies. This is what I've discovered about myself. I cannot just like have a chill hobby.
I like
When
that.
I'm into something, I just like I hobby to the max. And books were like that for me before it became my business. I was a first edition collector. I would hunt down signed first editions of books that I loved and keep them in pristine state and and just revel in owning a signed first edition of something. And that's the kind of, I guess, a part of the mentality that I've kind of brought to Illumicrate because I am that person. I'm that person that collects like every edition of the book that I love. I have a lot of collections of, just arcs for a specific author or a title or things like that. I hunt down like every edition there is. And I was that person. And I know that my customers are those people. And we help fuel that. That's why they like collecting our books because they are beautiful, they are very collectible. There's like a great kind of second-hand economy as well that, as an economist, I find completely fascinating, the sort of the the second yeah, the reselling economy, like what books are worth, why books are worth more than others, what people buy the books for. Is it to keep? Is it to trade? Is it to sell? There's so many different factors, I think, of why people buy our books. But I definitely say that yes, we have helped. We have definitely helped that kind of collectible, making books a collectible item landscape. But that's something that's been around for ages. Who has collecting first editions, collecting nice copies, collecting illustrated editions, signed editions. That's always been a thing for book
Yeah.
hobbyists.
They used to be
Yeah.
really expensive though. I remember the Folio books did this incredible edition of like Philip K. Dick's collected works, and I absolutely loved it. Like it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, and it was 700 quid, and it's just like I don't love it that much.
Yeah, it's really hard, and I dabble a little bit in the high end collectible market. There are definitely really small presses that do like letterpress stuff, like really short run like numbered editions, and I love those books. I think they're beautifully made. I think they look gorgeous,
Yeah.
and there's something to collecting, like a beautiful piece of art of something that you love. I'm here for collectors. If you want to collect, you collect, collect and do it. Do it. Have fun doing it.
I was going to
I
ask
love it.
one last question about crates, crate markets abroad, and then let Scott move into Daphne Press itself. But yeah, just I wanted to like we sort of know in publishing, at least authors are told that the crate market is not as big in the States, even though it's a bigger country. And I just wondered if you had any insight into that. If you don't know, it's all right. If you can't share, that's okay. But do you? Because Illumicrate's now gotten USA distribution, isn't it? And I guess we'll find out if that's a game changer.
Yeah. The very first box I think of its kind of this sort of kind is based in the U.S., and they are still a box that are operating today. I genuinely think it is down to firstly the market size I think does play into it because the UK is a much smaller market. So an order of the size of Illumicrates and or some of our competitors is big enough that publishers will see that as a significant order for the market size and will um, do what they can to make the book as special for us as a customer as possible. I think from what I've heard in the US, obviously I don't directly work with I work with some US publishers now that we are bigger, but I have heard of other I've heard sort of secondhand smaller customers and actually knowing what my discussions with publishers are that there are minimum quantities that US publishers will need for them to be able to do something bespoke. And I think customers want or need that level of bespoke when they are choosing to buy the book, not from a bookshop, but from another specialist retailer such as ourselves. So I think that is a huge barrier to entry in the US market, more so than it is here. I think I think UK publishers have introduced a minimum order quantity, but it is, I'm sure, a lot lower.
Yeah, so it's like it's a smaller niche, but you can dominate it, which is what we try to do with this podcast. We're a very niche topic.
And it's also part of it is also printer capacity. I think UK printers have improved their capabilities, as I've mentioned already, been able to do the fancy edges, they've been able to do this, that, and the other, whereas I don't know or think US printers have had the ability to, or maybe they just choose not to. I think that's part of it as well, like what they actually can offer is interesting. And
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I would never have figured it out. Thank you. Yeah, everyone in the UK wants in on it now. Waterstones want to do other fancy editions,
I
and
think it's great.
it is.
I'm very much like the more the merrier. Like I think if if people see, the more people see it, the more people want it, right? And it becomes more of a thing, and demand will cope with. Demand will increase. Sales will increase. What printers and publishers can do will get better to meet those needs, and I think
Yeah,
it's
I
great.
honestly love it. Like if I buy a book, I want it to be beautiful, so I completely get it. As
Yeah. People's shelf spaces are, they're limited, right? And so when people buy something to display on their shelves, they want it to be nice. Yeah, they want it to be decorative as well as something that they want to read.
No, I was just going to comment on somehow that answer is not as surprising as as it might seem at first blush that it's who the blockers might be on the U.S. side. Sorry, just had to throw a little shade. But that is interesting. And I wonder, I was sitting here wondering, in the UK, this is just anecdotal, my personal observation from the outside, but it does seem like the UK science fiction and fantasy community is a little more tight knit, and I wonder how much that has to do with geography and more shared experiences or ability to connect in real life, or at the very least more shared context for shared experiences versus the US where it's a vast area. Yeah, people from Texas have a very different life from people in, say New England or what have you. That's interesting to think about.
So I would say it is very tight knit from the author side. Like you go to conventions, and I would say a lot of people generally know each other because the pool is smaller, and it's you can cross the country in a day. So
Yeah.
I do recognize a lot of the same faces crop up under the same small group of agents and stuff like that. And the readers here tend to be very dedicated. When I lived with my ex-husband, we inherited a load of books from his uncle, but when his uncle died, and his uncle had every science fiction fantasy book published in the UK between 1972 and like 2005, and then he had a bunch from the 30s, 40s, and 50s as well, and 10,000 books on his Kindle.
Wow.
And it was just, yeah, so we had this house that had 4,500 sci-fi and fantasy books, physical copies in it. But it's because he didn't, when he was growing up, there weren't that many readers and nerds. So, the few that were there, they're very dedicated. They know each other. And I guess maybe that's a bit more of a cultural thing for us. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
That's
I
amazing,
definitely
honestly.
think having a distance always plays a role, but I also think it is because it is, as Cindy says, it's just a smaller pool, it's the same people. You just naturally kind of gravitate to each other and form, a really good group, I think.
So, how did you make the leap from doing crates to running your own sci-fi and fantasy imprint? And we're kind of interested in, what prompted that change, what kind of practical considerations are involved in setting up an independent publisher, because that is really complicated. I see a lot of people in Facebook groups and forums say, "How do I set up my own press?" And the advice is almost always don't.
I wish I was a part of those groups now.
Yeah. It seems like literally every small press, and no offense to small press listeners, but you hear about all of these presses pop up, whether it's somebody building a press just to print their own and their friends, or whether it's somebody trying to set up a legitimate business as a small press. It just seems like it's such a tough business, but
Most of them fold within 2 years.
yeah, you seem to be the lone star in a dark sky, so we want to hear about it.
Well, we've not yet hit 2 years, so we'll see. We'll see where we end up with in a year's time. Um, I, well, I think just going back to the original question, tell us about how we started Daphne Press. It almost felt like a natural progression, I think. You know, we really have I feel personally that we as a team, both from Illumicrate and Daphne Press, and we all work kind of as one big, happy family. We have a really good understanding of what we think our readers want and what our readers like to read and what our customers have historically gravitated towards. And I felt like we had all we did. It just seemed like the natural next step to then publish your own books. I was honestly I was quite frustrated with sometimes we would see a book that would be acquired in the U.S. and we would ask, and it sounded great, and we would ask around and we would, is anyone in the UK publishing this? And usually the answer is no. And I get it. It's a smaller market. There's not room for every book that gets published in other countries to come to the UK. There just isn't. It was a bit of both. I wanted the freedom to kind of choose the books that I wanted and bring books over or acquire books that I thought were really good fits for the modern fantasy reading audience, I want to say, here in the UK. I also just wanted the freedom to be able to do exactly what I wanted to the books that I had. Yeah, that was my sort of thought process for starting my own press. And again, it doesn't come without its like I have I've had a lot of experience with Illumicrate. I kind of have a good sense of how publishing works. I'm in touch with a lot of agents. I felt like I had enough in place that I could give it a try, right? That's how I approach things. I'm always like, I'm gonna think sensibly if I've got like the tools or the skills, or if I know the right people to be able to at least make a go of it, and that was um my always my first the first thing I think about when I'm trying to start something new. With Daphne Press, it definitely did have its challenges because there were always parts of publishing that were unknown to me. I think, publishing as an industry, as you guys have talked about on several occasions, is very opaque, and it is for a reason. I think it is because as businesses, they need to protect, not their knowledge, and that's what makes the business run. And it's like giving away industry secrets. It's like if KFC told everyone what their secret recipe was. It's that kind of thing. And I understand that businesses have to protect their business, and knowledge is a big part of that. So it was very difficult. I knew right away I needed to hire an editor. Like I don't have an edit. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not an editor. I don't have any editorial experience. I knew right away that that was the first, role that I needed to hire. I needed to hire a commissioning editor that could work with authors that we acquired, because I wanted to give authors the same experience that they were getting, from it. I didn't want to just kind of start up this press, buy some books, and not be able to edit my author's work or work with the authors into making their books better. And so I knew that's the first person that I needed to hire was that. And thankfully we have hired Davy Lancet. He came from another SFF publisher, so he had 5+ years experience commissioning and editing books, which is invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have input onto story changes? Because I know you say you're not an editor, but if you're involved in the acquisitions process, or maybe you should tell us if you're allowed to talk about what that acquisitions process looks like, because I think you do it a bit differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely have some input. Obviously, I think what I'm lacking is like, I've never written edit letter. I've never kind of workshopped through a book, because I'm both not an editor and I'm not a writer either. So I have no insight into either part of the process, really. I guess I do almost quite I know when something's not working in a book, and I have I have some suggestions like of what
Mm-hmm.
I would do to improve a book, but they're not it's not so formal,
Yeah.
and I think that I didn't want to just go in maybe, and maybe tell me if I'm wrong, but I didn't want to like acquire an author and just start telling them I don't know how to fix this, but you need to fix this. I don't
Yeah.
think that would go down very well,
No.
I,
So
yeah.
that's a very noble sentiment. I'll just throw out there that the range of what people get back from their editors is very wide. And that's just coming from knowing like, a dozen or so authors and asking them what their edit letters look like, and what kind of feedback they get. Yeah, as far as I can tell, there's no standard.
Well,
Go
no,
ahead,
I,
Cindy.
I
Sorry.
think they're all trained, but I think it was Shipping and Handling podcast where they talked about the fact that some editors are really good at marketing, but like marketing in the sense of like getting people excited for a book, pushing hype, getting booksellers excited, being really good project managers. And some editors are actually good at like the craft side of the editing, and the gold standard is an
Mm-hmm.
editor who's good at both, but you don't necessarily get one who's good at both. And I think that's why it can vary, and because different books maybe benefit from different levels of editing, or some books, some authors, produce books that are basically polished, and so they're fine with it. An editor is just a good project manager, and maybe that's where a lot of the variety comes in. And I can say that with impunity because I feel like my editor's good at both. So that's always that's always why I'm okay to like be on the podcast, basically.
And I think that's actually really 3 or 4 different roles that you mentioned, right? From my perspective.
They do a
So
ton
the
of
one
different
is
things. It's crazy.
yeah, the well, and that's a big part. We've talked about this a little bit before, but I think that's a huge part of why publishing can go so wrong for some people, and why relationships with editors might flame out pretty hard sometimes, because they really are expected to do so many things. There are relatively few roles that I know of in corporate America that expect that much out of that kind of role, because as you mentioned, there's the craft, right? They're expected to be good enough at writing and storytelling that they can tell a professional author what they're, at the very least, what they're not doing right, and where they need to pay more attention to something that's not working. Maybe they suggest specific fixes. I don't know how each individual works, right? But so there's the craft. Then there's project management, right? Like, people make whole careers out of just project management, and it's hard, and it really sucks. Like, half of why I got out of corporate America is because I kept being forced into the project management or program management box, and I just hated it. Like, it is so bad. And then there's marketing, and knowing who the target consumer is, and knowing who a book would be targeting, and what that market size looks like, and how they are best communicated to. And that's insane too, right? And then there's that internal politics and gathering support internally. And honestly, in the corporate world, people who are good at all 4 of those things end up being executives that are paid shit tons of money, like so much money. If you're good at all those things, you are worth so much money.
Unless you're an
And that
editor,
is
in which case you may,
yeah, that's the problem. Yeah.
and then you
Yeah.
can make 45 grand a year in New York.
Yeah. Yes. Live in the subway. Yeah.
Every so often I hear people say online, like, I think people outside the industry have this view of editors as being like, they're only in it for the money. And I just think, like, do you guys know how little money they don't make?
Yeah, at publishing, and I gave a talk at a school just earlier this week actually for kind of teenagers that wanted to know more about publishing, and I said, I mean, one of the things I said was that no one works in publishing unless they really love books, right? It's not one of those industries that you go, like, my analogy was like, no one works in banking and is like, oh, banks, they're the best, right? Like, but people that work in publishing love books. You have to love books, I think, to work under the conditions that you work under when you work in. Sorry,
No,
where
no.
were we?
Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, we were, I guess, waffling on about how complicated it was in hiring editors.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And well, the other piece that I found extremely difficult was the sales piece, and a lot of people I talk to, a lot of, people who are very, even high up in traditional publishers, people with experiences starting their own presses, have said
Hmm.
that the sales piece is absolutely crucial, and because if you've got no one to sell your books, no one's going to know it's a book. And it's not going to get into the shops, which is what we wanted. So I didn't want to start a press and just print books to go in Illumicrate. That was not the intention of Daphne Press. That's a nice bonus, I think, that to have kind of a direct retailer that I can work with. But it wasn't the only thing that I wanted to accomplish, and I wanted our books to be available widely in the trade, and I wanted, again, all the authors that I brought on board to get that experience of seeing their book in a bookshop, and which was very important to me. So that piece was, it was different. Honestly, it was hard. it was really hard. I reached out to a lot of different people. There are a lot of companies that do sales on behalf of small publishers. That is a business. There's certainly a lot of those companies here in the UK. I wanted someone with the right experience. The experience handling genre. Selling genre, and we were lucky enough to do a deal with Titan Books that do our sales and distribution, and Titan obviously are themselves an SFF publisher. They are independent, but they have a great sales arm. And first of all, I just want to say kudos to everyone that works in sales in books, because I think your function is so important. It really is. And I work with a
Yeah.
lot of salespeople, both from who do sales for Daphne Press and who do sales for publishers to me as Illumicrate, and I think you're all doing an incredible job. I genuinely do. So kudos to everyone that works in sales in publishing. But Titan Books they just felt like a good fit because they were genre specialists. They were themselves an independent publisher, and their books are widely available in the trade here and export. And so and they definitely they had the right capabilities to be able to sell our books, and they have honestly done a terrific job.
They're a lovely
Because
press, and George is like he's one of those editors that I know. I think two or three people who have him as an editor, and they absolutely adore him. So
George is he's great. But yeah, I just honestly, they've done so well for us, and I think we've been very lucky to have a sales team that actually push our books. Because our books are in bookshops, and we're getting Waterstone special editions, and we're selling to other retailers. Every time I go into the works, I see one of our books, and I'm like, that's really cool, right? Yeah. And I wouldn't have had it, I wouldn't have just done it for Illumicray. I wanted it to be like a legit.
Now, you mentioned Titan does both UK and sales for export. Does that mean they have gotten you a significant US footprint as well, and you have good distribution there, or is it primarily UK at the moment?
It is primarily a UK, Europe, and Australia, New Zealand, mainly because most of the things that we have acquired for Daphne Press are those territories thus far.
Hmm.
So
The rights, yeah.
I have had books, sent to me that were offering World, or we could have bought World, but
Yeah.
again, I don't want to do things that I can't deliver on, So I wasn't going to acquire World, not knowing how I was going to sell the book into the US yet. And I'm working on that, right? And I'm learning about the US market. I'm working on what works there, how, who are the key retailers, how does distribution work?
Hmm.
And I want that in place before I then start acquiring US rights and not doing anything with them, to be honest.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yep.
no, that's
I
very
love that
sensible.
because yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, and I think that more than anything separates you from the other players in the game. The fact that you care about what you're doing with the rights you acquire, and it's not just a grab to get all of the rights that you can because they might become valuable to you at some point in the future. Yeah, that's pretty amazing, and that makes a ton of sense.
I just don't, for me, I want to be, I care about my authors. I want them to get the best deal that they can possibly get. And I know that them selling me US rights is not going to be the best deal for them. And so why wouldn't I be happy with the rights that I can actually sell for the markets that I am comfortable that I can do a good
Yeah,
job in, and
yeah.
actually let them get that other part of their income from other rights that they can sell to other publishers that can do an equally good job in those markets.
Yeah, and in the end,
Absolutely.
everyone benefits that way because if it sells well in one market, it's kind of boosting it in another one. Yeah, do you? I think you've got a few more questions, Scott, and then we'll probably let you go after those.
Yeah, Daphne, I know it's late there for both of you,
I
really.
don't mind. Honestly, this has been really fun. You guys are great. I have said I'm a huge fan of the podcast. I look forward to it when it comes up on my podcast. Get saying there's a new episode. I get very excited.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That's really amazing to hear and weird to hear, but amazing to hear. Yeah, I mean the rest of our questions, and Sonia and I have been going through a shared document of our questions, that we sent you, and like crossing off and adding as we go. So trying to look through and see what we need to hit. I think you've organically hit most of them. I think you talked about why you built Daphne in addition to Illumicrate, and that plays into how I'm sure you acquire books. But is there anything specific that you look for? And this might be something to inform the agents and authors that are listening, which is also weird, but they are. What are you looking for at Daphne? What do you hope people send your way?
Yeah, for sure. Daphne Press, I think, we are still trying to form our sort of identity. I want the identity to be, we are a home for, telling, being a space for marginalized writers to be able to tell their stories, and that is obviously one of like our key pillars. I want to tell stories from authors from different backgrounds, authors of color, whether that's diaspora, whether that's not disabled authors, queer authors. I want those stories, and those are stories that I'm always looking for. That the team are always looking for. I have certain things that I love. My team and my editor obviously have certain things that they love. I think obviously Illumicrate books are a good measure for the type of books that we've read and enjoyed. And again,
Sure.
that is very vast in terms of the types of books that we have picked and featured. I'm going to put this out there into the world because I promised my team that I would something, but I have become a huge audio listener. Actually, just this literally this past year, and I would probably get to submissions faster if the author would read me the first three chapters and, and send it with the submission. So I'm just gonna throw that into the world and see if that actually becomes a thing. No pressure, but I really enjoy books being read as audio. I've read so many fantastic books that way, and that's I think a testament to some of the great audio production and the narrators that are hired, and actors that are hired to do audiobooks. But I find things more memorable, I think, when I listen to them in audio, which is a strange thing. And it's maybe just because I read a lot.
Yeah.
I do a lot of my reading on my Kindle, because a lot of things I get are manuscripts. Yeah, so I don't actually have physical books. By the time physical arcs come out, it's too late a lot of the time. I do all of my work reading on my Kindle or my computer. I try my very best not to read on my computer because it's just really bad for your eyes. Yeah. If authors want to read me their books and send it with submissions, I would absolutely love that. I know it's like a pipe dream, but
It might
I'm just
happen.
gonna.
I think you underestimate how desperate authors can be.
You are about to get so many audio files.
Do you accept
But
submissions
my
from indie authors as well? I know people have asked you about that in the past.
Not at the moment. So we have actually acquired one indie author, but that was me approaching her. I was a fan of her work, and so I approached her about it, and I made a very good case for, Daphne Press, and thankfully she agreed. I feel like we are getting enough submissions through agents, and through agents that I have faith that they're doing a good job, kind of vetting and sending us a thing sifting through things and knowing exactly the sort of books that we would be interested in. Thank you, agents, for for doing that. I think maybe at some point when, say, we have, because obviously we only have Davy as our commissioning editor, myself who also reads and acquires, and then Caitlin, who I mentioned before, and Tori are sort of the core team that sort of read and choose Daphne what books we want to acquire. I think were the team to expand and we were to take on another editor, an editorial assistant, or something along those lines, then maybe there would be a time, like a window, where we potentially could open up to indie authors and things like that. But I think indie authors are doing amazingly at the moment. I think this is the time, right, that indie publishing is having like a great boom. And first of all, I'm in awe of authors that can write so fast.
Yeah.
Because they produce so many books so quickly, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And essentially each indie author is their own publisher, and I think
Hmm.
that's a great skill set, to have, because they're out there, they're marketing their books, they're turning it into the right file formats, they're doing their own production, they're doing their own editing, they're a publisher in their own right. And so many authors have found success that way, and I think if that's what works best for you, then I think you should do that. Yeah.
No, that's totally fine. Mostly I was just curious, but yeah. And I thought if I don't ask that, people will write in and like bug me and say I should have asked that or something. So
I would love to. I would honestly love to, because I think there's a lot of great stories out there that are indie published, but it's the same thing. It's sort of the opposite question. Like, if you are a successful indie published author, what would you really want to be traditionally published?
Yeah.
Like,
for sprayed edges, maybe.
first rate edges, maybe. Yeah.
Hey, sprayed edges are awesome.
You could do a lot. You could do a lot for a sprayed edge, right?
Apparently.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us because I mean I was completely psyched when you said you wanted to you were willing to come and chat and tell us about the very mysterious world of crates.
It was
Hopefully
it
a
was a
little bit
very
less serious now.
Hopefully, yes, it is much less.
yeah, I mean you might have given away too much info. Like this was this was extremely informative. But yeah, it was a big moment for us when Sunny said, "Oh my God, Daphne listens to the show."
Um,
I was like, "What?" So yeah, this has been very, very fun for us.
You've been listening to the Publishing Radio Podcast with Sunny Dean and Scott Drakeford. Tune in next time for more in-depth discussion on everything publishing industry. See you later.